The movie opens with the information that every year an estimated 42,000 people are killed on highways. The scene then shifts to a young man named Jim, who arrives to pick up his girlfriend, Grace, from her hostel. The couple is excited about their road trip to New Mexico, where they plan to meet their friends for spring break. After a few hours of driving, they successfully cross the border and reach New Mexico. Later in the evening, amidst heavy rainfall, the couple is chatting while driving. And then all of a sudden, Jim gets distracted and nearly hits a man standing in the middle of the road. Jim feels he should check on the man, as he could be stranded, but Grace refuses, stating that it's dangerous to let such strangers into their car. Just then, they notice the man approaching them, and Grace urges Jim to drive away, but he realizes that the car is not starting. As the man gets closer, the couple begins to panic. Luckily, just before he reaches them, Jim gets the car started, and they speed away from there. Jim feels guilty for not helping the man, but Grace doesn't seem to care. Not long after, the couple stops at a gas station and decides to refill. Jim talks with the store clerk and mentions that they saw a stranded man on the road earlier, requesting that they send help, but the clerk claims that they don't have any vehicles. Grace then takes the bathroom key from the store and heads inside. Meanwhile, the clerk acts strangely and invites Jim to hang out with him. Feeling uneasy, Jim goes outside to refill the fuel. Shortly after, a truck pulls up, from which the same hitchhiker gets out. Jim recognizes the man's outfit and tries to hide his face in shame. The man enters the store, and Jim also has to go inside to pay the gas money. Luckily, the hitchhiker doesn't recognize him, but the store clerk creates an awkward situation by mentioning that he must be the same hitchhiker Jim was talking about earlier. Jim is embarrassed and apologizes to the man for not picking him up, and the latter claims he wouldn't pick himself up either. Since the two are heading north, the man asks Jim for a lift to the nearby motel, which is 15 miles away. And this time, our hero reluctantly agrees to give him a ride. The man introduces himself as John Ryder, and Grace doesn't like the idea of giving him a lift. However, she cannot object, so she reluctantly sits in the back seat while the guys sit in front, and everything seems to be going smoothly. At one point, John stares at Grace and comments that she is beautiful. Jim thanks him politely, but the man suddenly asks how long he's been banging her. Hearing this, Jim is offended and notices that John is wearing a wedding ring, so he asks how long he has been banging his wife. But John claims that he doesn't have any and that this ring is also fake. He asserts that he only wears it because it helps strangers think he's trustworthy. Suddenly, the man takes Jim's phone and breaks it into pieces. He also takes out a knife, which sends the couple into a state of panic. Terrified, Jim asks what he wants and if he's doing this for money or the car, but John claims that he doesn't want such things. Grace discreetly tries to call the cops, but John holds her at knife point and snatches her phone. The psycho tells Jim that if he wants to save his girlfriend, he must say, "I want to die," and Jim reluctantly says that he wants to die. During this, he speeds up the car to its maximum and abruptly hits the brakes, causing John to fall forward. Taking advantage of the situation, Grace opens the front door, and Jim kicks the hitchhiker until he finally falls out of the car. As they drive away, Grace is terrified and begins to cry. Jim asks her to immediately call the cops, but unfortunately, she can't find her phone anywhere, and assumes it must have fallen on the road. On the other hand, we see John lying on the road, and Grace's phone is ringing beside him. After a while, Grace falls asleep, so Jim pulls over to the roadside and begins drinking beer. But then, John suddenly breaks the car window, and this is when Jim wakes up in the morning, realizing that it was just a nightmare. Jim then talks to his girlfriend, who says that she doesn't want a holiday anymore and just wants to go home. However, Jim comforts her and assures her that the nightmare is over now, and soon she'll be with her friends and having fun. The two then resume driving, and they finally seem to be in a cheerful mood. Later, they notice a family passing by them with a married couple and their 2 kids. But to their surprise, John is also inside the vehicle. Realizing that the family is in danger, Jim and Grace drive by their side. They claim that the man is dangerous, but the other couple doesn't understand their words. Suddenly, a huge truck shows up from the opposite direction, causing Jim and Grace to crash and fall on a small slope. They somehow manage to survive, but their car is wrecked. They also notice that the family has driven away without stopping. Having no other option, the couple continues on foot down the road. Grace is worried about how John found them, but Jim assumes it could have just been bad luck. Just then, they see a red truck passing by and wave, but it doesn't stop. After walking for a while, they spot the family's car on the side of the road. This horrifies them, and as Jim peeks inside the car, he is shocked to see everyone dead. John has brutally murdered even the little kid. The father is barely alive with a knife stuck in his body, and the couple decides to help him. Jim then gets in the back seat with the man, while Grace drives the car. Unfortunately, their nightmares are still not over, as they are suddenly attacked by a truck, which turns out to be driven by the psycho John. During the ensuing chase, John bashes their car several times. But then, he suddenly changes course and goes in the other direction. Jim and Grace don't understand what this man wants from them. Sometime later, they arrive in front of a cafe. While Jim stays in the car with the man, Grace rushes inside, covered in blood. She asks the waitress to call the police and requests paper towels. And the waitress directs her to the bathroom. While in the bathroom, Grace is horrified to see the red truck parked outside. She quickly locks the door and sits in a corner. She hears someone trying to open it, but the person soon leaves, and the red truck is also gone. This makes her feel that the danger is gone, so she opens the door. But then, Grace is confronted by a police officer, who arrests her. Outside, the injured man dies in Jim's arms, and he is also arrested for murder. The couple tries to explain the situation, but the cops don't listen and take them away. When they reach the station, Jim is immediately thrown into the cell. Meanwhile, Grace is taken to the interrogation room. She honestly tells the officer about everything that happened, but he doesn't believe her, and he walks out of the room. Afterward, Grace feels like someone is watching her through the one-way mirror, and once again tries to explain that she and her boyfriend are innocent. But we see that John is standing on the other side and drawing a smiley face with blood. Grace then comes out of the interrogation room but is horrified to see several murdered police officers lying in the hallway. Meanwhile, Jim is calling her from downstairs, while John tries to silence him. Jim asks why he is doing this, but John says he's a smart kid and can figure it out himself. Grace then takes a pistol and the keys from the dead cop and heads downstairs. When she arrives, John is already gone, so she frees her boyfriend, and the two run away from there. As they escape, several backup officers show up at the station. Grace suggests that they go back and explain their predicament, but Jim refuses. He thinks that no one's going to believe them anyway. Here Grace starts blaming Jim for offering the psycho a ride. But Jim says he didn't know that he's a lunatic. And then all of a sudden, the red truck suddenly fell upon them, and luckily, it did not hit them. Meanwhile, at the station, a senior officer named Captain Estridge is investigating the case. He doesn't believe that such a young couple could murder all those cops so skillfully. He then sees the smiley face of blood in the mirror and gets confused, because Grace was supposed to be in the interrogation room while Jim was locked up. So, he thinks there must be a third suspect. Elsewhere, Jim and Grace arrive at a scrapyard, calling for help, but no one shows up. They soon notice that John is coming towards them with a gun, and try to climb over a wired fence. But the dogs guarding the house start barking at them. With no other choice, the couple rushes inside a nearby cabin and locks themselves in. Soon after, a cop arrives looking for them. Grace suggests that they should talk to him, claiming it's their only way out of there. Jim is initially hesitant, but when she keeps on insisting, he hands her the gun and goes out to chat with the officer. Just as expected, Jim is immediately pinned to the ground and arrested. Grace then points her gun at the officer and demands that he release her boyfriend. She asks Jim to snatch the cop's gun and get into the police car. Meanwhile, Captain Estridge hears the commotion on the radio and sends a backup. Grace holds the cop at gunpoint and insists that the killer come with them, right when the cop is shot in the head by John. Unfortunately, another sheriff arrives and assumes that Grace is responsible for the killing, while the couple drives away from there. Meanwhile, Captain Estridge sends many patrol cars and a helicopter to chase after them. During the pursuit, the couple talks with him via radio. Grace insists that they are innocent and that they didn't kill anyone. The captain tells them to stop the car so they can talk, but the couple continues driving. As a result, Captain Estridge grows frustrated and orders his team to take action. The cops begin shooting at them randomly, forcing Jim and Grace to stop. Unexpectedly, at that moment, John shows up in his vehicle. He catches up to them and shoots at a cop, causing the car to crash into another police car, killing everyone inside. After finishing off everyone on the ground, he even takes down the helicopter by shooting the pilot. Seeing this, the couple desperately tries to escape, but their car tire bursts, and now only run on the rim, which eventually gets heated. John catches up to them, but he simply drives away without causing any damage. That evening, Jim and Grace arrive at a motel and discreetly break into one of the rooms. And there they get intimate. Afterward, Jim states that he's heading out to call for help using a public pay phone. He also apologizes to Grace for getting them into this mess, but she doesn't reply. After he leaves, Grace watches television and soon falls asleep. A while later, she wakes up to someone touching her and assumes it must be her boyfriend. But to her horror, it turns out to be John. Grace attacks him using a light bulb and manages to run to the bathroom. She picks up the gun that was left behind in the bathroom. After he disappears, Grace exits the motel and tearfully shouts Jim's name while holding the gun. She is noticed by the motel owner, who immediately calls the cops. To her surprise, Grace finds Jim, who has been chained in between two trucks. She tries her best to free him, but to no avail. Soon, John steps on the pedal, pulling Jim's body in two directions. Grace then points a gun at him, but he explains that if he slips from the clutch, the truck will start rolling and her boyfriend's body will split in two. John asks her to get inside, and she reluctantly does so. Here she asks him to turn off the engine, but John seems unfazed and surprisingly asks her to shoot him. John insists that if she wants to save her boyfriend, she must kill him first. But despite the horrors she has endured, Grace doesn't have the guts to kill him. When the police arrive, Grace is holding the gun to John's head, who repeats the line, "I want to die." Realizing that she is not going to shoot, he feels disappointed and calls her useless. He then angrily stomps on the accelerator, causing Jim's body to be torn in two. After witnessing this horrific scene, the police finally realize that John is the serial killer they are looking for, but they do not know the true identity of him. Afterward, Captain Estridge interrogates the killer and asks about his motives for killing those people. However, the man gives very vague answers and shows no fear or remorse. The captain tries to intimidate him by mentioning that he will get the death penalty. But the killer doesn't seem to care. Later, Captain Estridge tells Grace that he will take her to Albuquerque for psychological trauma treatment, and her family will meet her there. As they get into the car, they notice the killer getting in a van with several cops. He is being transported by several officers to another prison across the state. The two vehicles begin their journey, and on the way, Captain Estridge apologizes to Grace for everything she has been through. Meanwhile, we see that the man isn't an ordinary prisoner. The psycho struggles and eventually manages to break free, and uses the handcuffs to kill the cop next to him. He then shoots the other 2 officers in the passenger seat. This causes a serious accident on the highway, with the van crashing into an approaching vehicle. The collision also impacts Captain Estridge's car, leaving his legs stuck in the car. Having enough, Grace steals the gun from Estridge and is determined to take matters into her own hands. The captain tries to stop her, however, she doesn't listen and approaches the van. But the killer easily overpowers her and locks her inside the van. Grace swiftly seizes a rifle from the front seat, while the killer fires at the gasoline-leaking floor, causing the van to catch fire. The killer approaches Captain Estridge and shoots him in the head. Grace jumps out of the burning van with a rifle, while the man calmly walks away. She then takes him down with multiple shots. Here the killer asks if it feels good, but Grace replies that she doesn't feel a thing, and he seems to be disappointed by the answer. And there the movie ends.